they don't go too far over the line, we'll let it go. We'll let it go.
Should we?
Yep. Thank you, Madam Chair. I've received 3 other business items in advance of the meeting. OB1 pertains to summer construction noise and was raised by Councillor Zerillo. OB2 pertains to demolition waste reduction and was raised by Councillor Hodge. And OB3 pertains to the Oakdale Neighbourhood and was also raised by Councillor Hodge.
Thank you. Okay, is that...
All right. Item 1 is the agenda of the minutes on the Council and Committee meeting held on Monday, July 18th. The recommendation is to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Councillor Marsden, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favour? All opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 2 is our first delegation. I would like to invite Mr. Adrian Byrne, Policy and Public Affairs Representative at Chevron Canada Limited, to please come forward. Mr. Byrne will be speaking to self-serve at Chevron's retail service station locations in Coquitlam.
Hi everyone, happy 125th birthday. We're not that old, we're 80 in BC, but it's good to be here.
Welcome.
And we're glad to be involved through the BC 55 plus seniors games as well this year. I have a presentation here. I'll be quick. I know this has been an issue that's kind of controversial in the municipality over the years, and there's probably a lot of questions and answers. So if you bear with me, we'll get to that. Essentially, though, Chevron is here today seeking a policy direction from Council to move towards self-serve in the municipality. Presently, it's full serve, 100% full serve, and we'd like to see it move to self-serve. Just a bit about us. We're one of the world's leading integrated energy companies. We've been in the province for 80 years. We supply about 28% of British Columbia's fuel and over 8,500 businesses with their fuel. We have a lot of government stakeholders. The City of Coquitlam, for instance, get fuel from us, TransLink, BC Ferries, C-SPAN, and all the important industries in the province. We employ over 3,000 British Columbians, directly and indirectly, the bulk of which come from our refinery in Burnaby, but we have 160 retail sites across the province as well. We're pretty engaged in the community, and I mentioned the seniors games in Coquitlam this year, but I've outlined an example of other initiatives that we support. Whistler Adaptive Sports Program, for instance, skiing and snowboarding for athletes with disabilities. We help them have a record number of lessons this year. Cystic Fibrosis Canada, BC Cancer Foundation, the Coquitlam School District, we've supported with $200,000 in funding for science education over the last couple of years as well. And we're going to be continuing that program this year as well. We're a top-ranked global company in terms of our Human Rights Corporate Equality Index, diversity and opportunities for women. We have a Chevron-enabled employees network to help our employees with disabilities reach their full potential within the company as well. And the reason I'm here today is a focus on Part 17, Sections 1701 and 1702 of the Coquitlam zoning bylaw. And it relates to amending a condition of use. So right now, as it states, for service stations in the city, fuel must be dispensed only by personnel of the business retailing that fuel. We've found, and the industry has found in the province, that full serve fuel accounts for less than 5% of all fuel demand in the province. And from our perspective in Vancouver, for instance, where we have most of our stations in volume, it's less than 1% of the fuel volume that we sell. We're proposing direction from Council to modernise the bylaw. And the self-serve is one aspect of the bylaw that we believe is antiquated, but there's other aspects. For instance, we can't sell toilet paper, toothbrushes, fresh fruit, sandwiches at service stations in the city the way the bylaw is written now. So it would be good to see that reviewed, potentially. We think the bylaws are consistent with local government regulation across BC. There are a number of municipalities that have split island, where you do provide a full serve component, but essentially self-serve for people that want it, which is what we think is the vast majority of consumers in the market. But that full serve component for elderly people and disabilities if they choose to use it as well. A few years ago, there was an incident regarding safety, and the province introduced grants law to prevent workers from working alone at night. Full serve essentially requires someone to be pumping 24 hours at nighttime hours, and we think that impacts safety for that individual, so we prefer to keep our staff inside. But by providing full serve, you need more than one staff person on, and we found it uneconomical to do so. And I think broadly through the industry that's the case as well, and you'll notice a lot of service stations will close after a certain time of night in the city and not remain 24 hours. Primarily, it's about consumer choice and providing the option of self-serve to those that want it, and full serve to those that either want it or need it as well. That's essentially it. So that and that's our recommendation to council to set the policy direction for staff and individuals within the city to modernise the Coquitlam service station zoning bylaw, remove full serve. Ideally, we would like self-serve, but open to council's feedback on that.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne, and thank you for keeping it pretty close to the 5-minute limit. I do have a couple of questions here. So, Councillor O'Neill?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. It's a very interesting issue. Does Chevron Canada own all of its outlets?
We do. Not all of them in the province, but in Coquitlam we do. The vast majority of Chevrons in British Columbia are owned by the company. They're company owned, but they're managed by franchisees, so to speak, retailers.
So in Coquitlam, then do you specifically instruct your employees who work at the company-owned stores not to dispense fuel, not to allow customers to dispense fuel, or do you allow that to happen if customers?
We prefer that it doesn't happen, and first of all, they're not our employees; they're employees of the franchisee.
Oh, I'm sorry, I asked you if you own the franchise.
We own the land and we own the station, but the operations are run by an independent retailer, usually a small business person from the area. Okay. And they can run multiple Chevron sites at any one time. But their contract with us, we follow bylaws to the T as close as possible, although there are instances where members of the public don't want to wait for full serve and they will fill it up. But it's very hard to prevent individuals from doing that themselves. But for the most part, in Coquitlam and also Richmond, yeah.
I've always been actually curious about that. So there's no mechanism that a company that wanted to abide by this bylaw and could put in place that would prevent members of the public from filling up by themselves if the wait was too long or something. There's no technology that allows that?
Not that I'm aware of. We could shut down the pump in some way. We don't necessarily have the technology to do that if people drive up and they're prepaying and go to fill up, but we don't shut that down, and we don't view it as our responsibility to enforce the bylaw either. While we follow the bylaw and we'll provide staff by the retailer to fill up, members of the public we'll go ahead and do that anyway.
So have you done any studies on the time and the cost involved, let's say, in terms of if we wanted to minimally meet the bylaw in all circumstances and not allow, and really put something in place and not allow people to fill up on their own, what that would cost, and if it's the minimal meeting, and would it mean longer lineups, short lineups? Obviously, if you have 6 people working and one person each pump, it's going to happen really quickly. I'm thinking that'd be totally uneconomic.
Yeah, we haven't studied that, and what would likely happen is it would affect the utilisation of the site, and you'd have more idling and congestion around sites as pumps are shut down until people can actually provide the service. I think that would have an adverse reaction.
Does your contract with your franchisees that run the station say that they have to have a minimum number of people on staff at any time?
Not a minimum, but we do via that contract, and they're meeting their obligations under the bylaw. We do employ as many people as necessary to meet the requirements of the bylaw. And like I said, sometimes people will fill up without waiting for people to come.
So as many people as necessary?
As necessary to meet. So
what would that be? A minimum of two, one person?
Yeah, no. If you during peak hour, it'll be more. If we have 8 pumps at a station, we'll need as many people as is required to fill up the demand at that time. During the day, demand drops off, so shifts, not necessarily employees, but shifts would change, and the amount of staff on would drop.
And that's part of your franchise agreement, that they say they're going to have those?
No, that's their obligation under the bylaw to meet it. We don't tell them who or how many people they should hire.
So...
But effectively, they would be breaking the bylaw.
I know that, but I'm just wondering what your responsibility is. Do you give them a guideline for suggested number of employees at different times?
We ask for their feedback. They operate the site however many they think we need, and we do manage them remotely to make sure that we're meeting the utilisation objectives.
How does that management? That's really okay. So you do manage.
Yeah,
their personnel on staff.
So we have individuals that work for our company that oversee multiple stations. And in Coquitlam, they will work with the franchisee to make sure that enough people are on site to meet the demand of the consumer. If we're not doing that, we will receive complaints through our customer service centre, and we're trying to remain one of the most respected brands in BC, so we don't really hear a lot of negative feedback.
Your experience that the number of complaints you receive would be diminished by allowing people to pump themselves when the person power in place isn't sufficient?
I receive 1 or 2 complaints a year from people in full serve areas that feel that the bylaw is not being respected, so it's very minor amount of complaints from the public. I think through working with our retailer in Coquitlam, and Richmond is the only other municipality with a full serve, we are staffing close to what is necessary to meet the demands of the market, so we don't actually get that many complaints.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Hodge?
So in Coquitlam, you have stations. You have one on Coma Lake at Coma Lake Emporia. You have one on Burnett, and you have, where's the third?
Just the 2.
It's just the 2. Okay. So we have a bylaw in place, and I live in a different part of the city, so I don't fill up at your stations. I have from time to time. If you were one of your competitors here today, I would have a lot to say to them about how I believe that the bylaw is being intentionally skirted.
Yeah.
And I will go into stations and I follow the bylaw because I have to follow the bylaw, and I sit and I wait and I don't get out and touch that nozzle. Although I find it interesting now that I now have to get out and punch my code in if I use a credit card and then stand beside while they pump, but that's the rules. There are some stations in this city where the lineup is huge, and I've often wondered why, and I don't expect you to answer because this isn't the case in your station, but there are several stations here, we all know which ones they are in this area, and there's 20 pumps and 2 guys working. You can't expect the 2 guys are going to serve. So they clearly expect that people are going to get out of their car and pump their own gas in total disregard of the bylaw. And I know you're here to have the bylaw changed, and I think the law is the law. whether we like it or not, until it's changed and we have stages. So this is out publicly to your competitors who are probably watching today. I am really annoyed that they are intentionally, in my view, skirting the rules. So I appreciate that you're coming to see if you can make changes to the rules. On that matter, I am curious as to, you said only 1% in Vancouver of your sales are through full serve.
Yeah.
Is that because in those stations where there are split bars, that there's just not the staff capacity, that people are in a hurry, they'd just rather hop out themselves? I mean, do we drive those statistics just because of it's more convenient for people?
I think self-serve is very convenient. A few points going back to what you said. The reason why there's chip and pin now is in response to credit card companies changing the rules as they apply to fraud. We were having a lot of fraud going on at our stations and in the industry. So now they've implemented chip and pin, which is kind of counterintuitive to full serve as it stands. And we are working to implement a portable payment system in areas that are full serve, so we can get around that chip.
So a person with disabilities can still use a credit card and not have to pay cash, which is currently what has to happen now.
Yeah. So what was the other?
No, I've just the 1%. Is that just a fact because that's the way the market's set up? Here in Coquitlam, it's supposed to be 100% the other way, but clearly that doesn't happen.
It is market demand, and it's what consumers prefer. If you go on the BC Paraplegic Association map of full serve stations, or where full serve is available throughout British Columbia, you'll notice in a lot of jurisdictions that have no full serve bylaw that full serve is available, and it's on the map. There's hundreds of stations, but in a place like Vancouver with Split Island, and North Vancouver as well that has Split Island, it's quicker for people to pump their own gas. A lot of people prefer that they pump their own gas as well. A lot of people are competent enough to do it themselves, and I feel that is why the market demands self-serve.
So is that what you're suggesting, that it would be a split island? You're not suggesting we get rid of full serve, or would that be the route the stations would rather go?
So ideally, Chevron, and I would use the rest of the province as an example, there's a handful of jurisdictions that have split island, and it works. Ideally, in the rest of the province, we will provide full serve options to people that require them, although it's not mandated. And you can go on our website and see a list of stations across the province that provide that benefit. We would ideally prefer self-serve, but we're open to compromising. I'm here today because I'm looking for direction from council on this, and it's not necessarily for us to decide the best thing. We know what our preference is, but really respect.
Just a quick question to staff. Mr. McIntyre, this is a citywide zoning, or would this be location to location? Could we pass a rule that sort of said at this gas station they can have a split island, but on this gas station they can't? Or can we even mandate a split island? Or is it just once you say you can have self-serve gas station, we could lose our full serve? What's our powers within our planning and zoning and legislative abilities here?
A number of questions there. Thank you. Firstly, how it applies now, and I think as Adrian said out, in the zoning bylaw, so the condition of use under those 4 or 5 zones that allow for service stations, it stipulates that it needs to be the full serve operation. And so it's a condition of use that applies across those zones, whether the service station is here on Lougheed Highway or over on Brunette. Now, my understanding is initially Chevron came in with this text amendment specific to their 2 sites, the one up on Como Lake and the one on Brunette. And when we first received it, we looked at it and thought, well, here we go again, because there's a bit of a history to this, and I can get to that if you wish as well. But we thought, rather than just zeroing in on just these 2 sites alone, it really deserved the broader discussion and consideration, because Chevron's competitors would obviously feel left out if this a special provision was made for just those 2 sites. Now, council ultimately can be fairly site-specific around zoning. We've done that before, for example, where we've had maybe new uses or an old use that's been enshrined on a specific site. You know, in the zoning, we might be for this site alone under this street address and legal that allow for it, but that's more an exception than the norm.
Okay. The ability to, we've had letters from residents, and some residents have said, hey, the split bar works well. Those who want full serve can have full serve. Those who want self-serve can have full self-serve. But I don't know that we can mandate that you have to have full serve in order to have self-serve. I mean, it sounds like some stations have done it voluntarily, but hearing or just say that only 1% of sales are full serve, I would be worried that if we ever opened it up, that full serve would just completely vanish if we don't have the ability to say one has to have both.
That is an option, and that's, in fact, coincidentally, the option that Port Moody landed on a number of years ago. I was at the city at the time, and the then mayor raised this as an issue, and rather than going to the full Coquitlam model, which they were looking at, and otherwise then being left fully to the decisions of the fuel companies and their operators. In Port Moody, they specify, I think it's 25% of the pumps are to be provided with staff for full serve. I'm not sure in the end how that's actually operating on the ground. There's not a lot of service stations in Port Moody, and I think most people take advantage of the self-serve. So I'm not sure how well manned those full serve pumps are. I think you have to get out and push a button and wait for someone to respond.
Okay, but it is within our municipal governance that we can put in a law that says one has to provide both.
Through the chair, that's correct. It's the same way we have a condition of use now stipulating full serve. We could remove it totally and leave it entirely to the volition of the fuel companies and their operators, or we could come something in between around a percentage of pumps that be full serve and self-serve. Could be hours of operation related to those different types of manning situations as well.
So there are options. Again, my concern would be the enforcement. We see we have a rule now that's not being followed. That's why site specific we can sort of say, look, you have a history of that. I just don't know how much we can get into that through bylaw enforcement and through zoning. But it sounds like at least there are some options there.
Again, through the chair, certainly there are.
Okay. And I had one question for you. You and I had a chance to meet, and one of the questions that I asked you at that time was providing 24-hour service. And with self-serve, it sounds like you could provide 24-hour service, which I think some people want that ability. But it came to mind, and I'll just, you know where I'm going with this, is that when I saw the pictures of the evacuation from Fort McKenzie, and I saw cars abandoned on the side of the road because they had run out of gas. And I remembered that last year when we had the big windstorm in August, and it knocked out the power to large sections of our city in the Lower Mainland. And what I heard afterwards was that most of the gas stations in those areas had to shut down. They couldn't pump gas. And I got thinking, our RCMP vehicles fill up at gas stations. If we were to lose our power citywide, we would lose the ability to fill up because none of our gas stations have backup generators. Is that something that any of your stations do by providing 24-hour service? Do they also look at putting generators in?
Not as a condition of that, but an example is in Louisiana. That's kind of a hurricane-prone area. We put generators in our stations, and we'd be willing to work with the city here and the emergency services to figure out a way to do that, but it's doable.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Still quite a speakers list here of people with questions for you. Next is Mayor Stewart.
I put my hand up when you said something, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to clarify. You said we don't see it as our obligation to enforce the bylaw. Not by we, you're referring to?
By forcing members of the public to, I guess, we see it as our obligation to follow all bylaws, but we can't prevent members of the public from not following the bylaw.
Okay, and yet the zoning, that's a zoning regulation that we're talking about here. The zoning bylaw states that for service station use, fuel must be dispensed only by personnel of the business retailing the fuel. And that obviously applies to the property owner.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to the resident.
Yeah.
The resident isn't breaking the bylaw.
Yeah.
The only one that's breaking the bylaw at that point is the service station.
Yeah, I think there's no mechanism to turn the pumps off. So
You have to turn the pumps on to let the person fill up, right?
yeah, during the day the pumps are turned on and people will just come. They're activated when they put their PIN and card in. But I'm not sure we have the technological ability to shut that off on an individual basis unless it's been filled up by someone else.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting. I just wanted to clarify this one point because it is your responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a bylaw that only applies to you, the service station.
Yeah.
It doesn't apply to the resident, actually.
Yeah.
And
So I misspoke.
yeah.
So
Okay. I want to make that clear. That said, I'm not. I'm. You want our opinion? I've said to you before. I have no interest in eliminating full serve from our gas stations.
Yeah.
I'm open to the idea of a compromise because I actually prefer pumping my own fuel as well. But I always want full serve at every station, other than those times when we currently don't have anybody that's open. And that's the question I'll ask then is. From 10 p.m. until 6 a.m., I don't want anyone, any young person that we're hoping that takes these jobs, we don't want them out there pumping the fuel, getting out of the booth and pumping fuel. So obviously, at that time, you're closed.
yeah,
You close at 10 o'clock and open at 6? Or?
10 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in other words, right now there's no. If we open that up to self-serve at that time, we're not losing any jobs. We're actually gaining jobs by the person that has to stay in the booth.
Yeah.
Do you operate any full-serve facilities anywhere in the province at 2 in the morning?
We have high volume sites. So Coquitlam, our sites are generally lower volume than Richmond, where we have full serve. And Richmond's seen their stations over the years decline. The amount of stations in that municipality's declined over the years, in part because of full serve and consolidation. Those stations are still high volume, and people are driving through Richmond. Maybe they're getting on the ferry or whatever. So where it makes economic sense, not all stations in the municipality of Richmond, but where it makes economic sense, because the volume is high enough to justify employing 2 people, they're still open.
Okay. But here in Coquitlam, so that's been my challenge, is that I'm particularly open to self-serve in the middle of the night because I don't want this personnel out.
Yeah.
And right now, you have to drive to Port Coquitlam or Burnaby in order to fill up if it's midnight.
And the reason they're out in Richmond is because they have a colleague who's working with them. They're not out by themselves, so we don't want that either.
Fair enough. And now in the Split Island model, see, my challenge is there are retailers that Councillor Hodge refers to, and I'm not ashamed to say that, yes, that just ignore the bylaw. They sort of, yes, there's someone here to pump gas, but he's on a break or something like that, and you have to get out of the car anyway. So I don't want that. I want retailer, and I recognize that Chevron, generally speaking, isn't that kind of retailer. It's a retailer that tries to abide by the rule. But I also don't mind the idea of having freedom of choice for the consumer. So that's my particular perspective. But I absolutely want to find a solution for the 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. standards. Thank you.
Councillor Cirillo?
Thank you for coming in, Adrian. My questions aren't necessarily for you outside of this issue, which I actually have no opinion on at this point in time. I have some questions for our city manager, if you don't mind, just around the process. I'm wondering about, is this bylaw change on our work plan, our 216 or our 217 work plan?
It's not on our work program as a high priority item, but when people apply for changes, we have an obligation to respond to them. We have from time to time, my understanding is, and Jim can clarify, but from time to time, one of the companies will ask about it, and in the past we've encouraged them to get together to propose some thoughtful changes that would provide some benefits for the community, that might be a better way of addressing it, other than simply on the backs of one application for one station or the other. When we've made those suggestions in the past, they generally have not followed up and nothing has come back. And it has not been a high priority item on our work program. So in the absence of council having it to the work program, we would not do a significant amount of work on this. And so I have not discussed this at all with Jim, because I do not get involved in micromanaging the regulatory side of the business. But in the absence of a council directive, I would be surprised if the staff would come back with a recommendation simply to change the long-standing community practice. I think that needs more of a holistic review. That would be my perspective, but I have not discussed this with Jim. So I don't know, Jim, if you had anything further to add to that.
Thank you, and through the chair again. I think the city managers quite accurately captured what's gone before. There has been discussions. It was more with an industry group before, the Canadian Petroleum Producers Institute, and then that name changed. Going back to I think it was 2008 or 2010, then 2012, and as the city manager described, in each of those periods, there would be meetings and discussions, and we would ask for follow-up information from the industry. What are the benefits that we're missing out on here in Coquitlam? What are the employment impacts? And the group would go away, and we wouldn't hear anything. And then the discussion would resume a year later, and there's basically going back over the same ground. I think now with Chevron, they've decided to sort of, pardon the expression, take the bull by the horns and launch their own text amendment, so that it has it on our application intake system. And it was a piece that we, as I said, initially it was for their 2 sites alone, but we urged them to broaden that out, so it would be more of a looking at the zones in total. Again, we'd asked for information, which has not been provided. I think Chevron wanted to get a bit of a sense from council as to the city's appetite for going down this path, and so we're at a point here. Unfortunately, this was one of the files that was being handled by a former staff member, and so it had to be reassigned. And as the city manager has noted, it has not been the highest priority in light of everything else we have on the go at the moment.
So that kind of plays to, we've already been talking about this for 30 minutes, and there's more questions. I have 2 pages of questions. I have more questions than answers, but I just will share that I'm not a fan of hearing about things in the paper. I'd rather hear about it through our staff. And I haven't had any private meetings with Chevron. I haven't had any information about this until I read it in the newspaper. And I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with this process of basically going around our staff. We're a very busy city. We're a very growing city, and like I said, I have no preference at this point, but I have so many questions that I would want to see a lot of the data. I would want to see a staff report. I would want to make an informed decision about this related to a whole bunch of things that I have questions about that I'm not going to take the time for today. But one thing that did come up in this discussion, and thank you, Councillor Hodge, for bringing it up, in my personal opinion, I would rather that if we were using city resources, we should use our city resources on a disaster response plan for gasoline for our first responder vehicles in the city of Coquitlam and that sort of stuff. So I would, if that's not on our radar, I almost think that should be on our radar, because if we are into a situation where in a power outage, a flood, anything, we certainly want to know that our first responders, our fire and our police can get out and serve the citizens. So I will just say that I would never make policy on the fly in this forum, and I'm actually disappointed that we're spending 30 minutes on this with all the things that are on our work plan for 2016-17. And that's nothing against you, Adrian. You're just here to deliver the message, but I'm not sure this is the policy. This is the way to change policy in the city of Coquitlam. Thank you.
On a point of order, I just want to clarify that last bit because I want to make sure that we have all the information, and I'd ask Mr. Diozegi to give us, or do we have any capacity within in-house for the fueling of vehicles in an emergency?
Yes, Your Worship. We have fuel tanks both for gasoline and diesel at our Austin Works yard. In case of power failure, we have generators so we can run them no matter virtually what's happening in the surrounding area. Also, we have fuel tanks at some of the fire departments. So if it comes to a larger scale emergency or just a larger scale power outage, we can actually fuel up our vehicles, responders, trucks, police, everything you like.
Just our vehicles.
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that it's a good point to raise, but we're obviously not having to look to Chevron to solve that challenge for us.
You guys get your fuel from us, right?
My thing is police cars. Police cars are different. They don't fill up at our stations.
Yeah, police cars can fill up. Police cars can fill up at the works yard or at the works yard. And we could fill ambulances for that.
Do you have anything else, Councillor Zerlo?
Thank you. No.
Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, thank you for your presentation. I guess one of the issues I think for most people is, and I would like to see the information on this, is everybody talks about jobs. Now, we heard some comments about opening 24/7 and more people employed. Your response seemed to be that Coquitlam wouldn't necessarily be open 24/7 because of the volume, so I don't know.
No, if it went to self-serve, it would be at that.
It would go 24/7. Yeah. So I think, a lot of people talk about the job loss, that we'd be losing jobs. So I think if you're to make a presentation or make an application to change, I want to see some, I think as Mr. McIntyre said, we need to have some background information. I need to know what would be the job increase or job loss. Would there be bigger investments? I met with you when you talked about, and you're saying maybe some other food stores and stuff would be added to it, or what investments would be. And I think we'd need to see from the other stations what they would be willing to do. So I'm one of these people that I like doing self-serve. I prefer to do it myself. So I'd like to see your analysis of that. I don't have a problem with that. I like the idea, though, going split island. I do think, and I would like to find a way that you would recommend or have an application about requirements of your franchisees or people to staff at a certain level all the time for that one island, for people that are elderly, people that are handicapped, and something that they will get service in that regardless up until a certain time of day. So those are my concerns. I think I would be willing to entertain it. This forum is used a number of times for people coming in and asking things for staff from council. It's not uncommon for people to make requests of stuff for applications. We take in applications all the time and process them, so it's not so much. I think if we turned everybody away because our work plan is full for applications, we'd be doing a disservice to our public. So I think we have to be willing to intake things. But I do think if you are going to make an application, you're here to hear some thoughts from council. Yeah. I really think you have to have the industry, with yourself or whatever, a full information package showing us and council the benefits of making this change.
Yeah. My response, one of the reasons why I'm here today is Chevron did put an application in, but it is a citywide issue that goes beyond our stations. And it's not necessarily, in our view, a planning issue as so much a policy issue for council. But yeah, I take your point on more information on jobs.
If we're going to make a policy, and I know council has said over the years, I've been here for 11, has always been about, one of the biggest factors from the public and from council has been job loss. Yeah. Young people or different people needing jobs, losing jobs. The companies are just taking all the money and only hiring one person when they had more people. So for me personally, I really want to see, and I think when you're talking about a policy change, the council has to be able to be convinced through strong information as to why we need to change the policy. And that's up to you.
I think so, yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Marsden?
Thank you.
Interesting concept with regards to the challenge we've got through. So clearly the bylaw is old and outdated in some ways with regards to the restrictions on the sale of products in the, let's call them convenience stores, because that's really what these operate as. And so is there a need to update that so they can at least provide that, those products? I think there absolutely is. I'm not going to speak to priority of it right now, but I think there certainly is opportunity for that. Through my work history, I've had the opportunity. I started my retail experience working in a self-serve station, working a graveyard shift. And so I recognize that there is employment opportunities here. I recognize there's customer service skills and things that people can learn and develop and utilize later in life. So the opportunity to extend the hours and have those graveyard shifts available to people starting out their careers or people looking for secondary jobs as well, I'd support that. In terms of how the full-serve system works in Coquitlam right now, I'm one of those people that pumps my own gas. You know what, the attendant will typically come up and say, do you need a hand with that? And then I think back to where I used to tear down the engine of my car, rebuild the carburetor, do all that stuff. And now with all the technology, the only thing left in my car that I can do is pump the gas. Everything else is computerized. So I like to think that by my pumping my own, it makes them available to serve another client, because you certainly aren't offering, one employee per pump or per island. So do I want to see the elimination of full serve? Absolutely not. I think we do hear from residents there's a desire to have it. There's an option to have it. Or a number of our seniors look and say, I want to be able to do that. And relying on that lone attendant to come out, lock the door, come out and serve them while others are waiting, that's not a good service model. And I don't think that's gonna work. So having full serve available, I think, is a must through specific hours. So whether that's 10 o'clock, and then you look at perhaps a self-serve option only after that, after those hours, 10 a.m. to 5 a.m. or 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. I'd be open to that. I'd also be open to looking at some split service where there's absolutely full service available, but if somebody wants to pump their own, they can.
Absolutely, and that's the model in Vancouver, North Vancouver, West Vancouver, and it works well.
So I'd be interested, as Councillor Asmussen has spoke about the numbers. What are the implications on those stations that you've taken in the past from full serve to self-serve or split serve? What are the implications on the FTE? There's stations I go into around town here, and they've got one person inside, and it's rush hour, and so they've got 2 or 3 people running pumps outside. That's great. Yeah. If we go this way, what I wouldn't want to see is suddenly that staff of 4 become 1 in and 1 out. Don't want to see that, because you're not going to justify it by saying, well, we created a job overnight. It's still a net loss. There is a significant number of residents that still do like to have the full serve option. We hear from them. I think it's important that you show us some numbers in terms of staffing implications. Because statistics are a wonderful thing. When you say that only 1% of your sales are in full serve, but you also acknowledge there's only 2 municipalities in the province that require full serve. Yeah. So what percentage of the stations are full serve? It's probably close to that 1%, right?
From a job creation and investment perspective as well, I will say that, and I can only speak for Chevron, not our competitors, but you might have an idea of how they make decisions. We have a certain amount of capital expenditure budgeted for retail stations in BC every year. That money will always go to districts that have less onerous regulation. So when we're looking at Coquitlam, upgrading those sites, maybe putting in a triple O's, other competitors maybe putting in a coffee shop attached to it, that funding will tend to flow the path of least resistance. It will go to Port Moody or Burnaby, and that investment generates jobs as well.
And I'm perfectly fine with that. I understand that. Again, through my working career, I've had the opportunity to work with a number of your franchisees as they had banking services, and we took care of them. So I've had that opportunity to be on the other side of the desk as well and recognize the challenges they have in ensuring their staff. So I'm not opposed to looking at introducing self-serve as split, and certainly after hours service. I'm not opposed to that. I'm certainly open to enabling the convenience stores to offer the full suite of products that somebody can find. You can buy it at 7-Eleven. Why can't you buy it at the town pantry, or the Esso, or whomever it might be as a supplier? I think having that flexibility and that open competitiveness, I think, is appropriate. In terms of timeliness and urgency, would I ask staff to push stuff off their desk to address this? No, I wouldn't. I don't think the screen is there. There certainly is push from industry to take a look at this, and so I think we should look at it in the same constraints as we would with anything when a resident comes forward and sits in that chair and asks for funding for any initiative. I think we take a look at it and see how does it fit in with the mandate, whether it be in this year or whether you look and say how do we fit it into the 2017 work plan. So certainly open to looking at it, but I would want to see more information from yourself and probably your industry colleagues in terms of where we might do this. So because I would not support it being site specific. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Reid and then Councillor O'Neill
I'm going
again.
to be quick. When we first started this many years ago, it was for jobs, for kids. Now we have seniors working in a lot of the stations. So that should tell you what the state of some of the economy and the low jobs and people trying to find jobs are. I definitely need numbers because it seems that there's a lot of manipulation when it comes to numbers, and I'd really like to see them before I did or expressed much of an opinion here. I wanted to tell you also, when you brought in food sales and that into your grocery stores, we had the corner stores coming in. These are family business, mom and pop shops, little restaurants. You know, we don't sell gas. Why should they be allowed to sell these products? So it's a hard balance here. It's a very hard balance. And
Chevron's a family business as well. These, like I said, these stores are operated by independent small retailers. They make the profits from what is sold in the station, not the company.
well, you make your profit off the percentage on the franchise, I believe.
We get a margin on the volume of fuel sold, not what they're selling in the store.
In any event, that's my opinion about the corner stores and restaurants. We have other businesses that aren't selling gas and are in those businesses, so I think we have to look at those. I am not particularly in favor of self-serve gas stations. I don't know about having a split pump at one. I'd have to look about that. And Councillor Hodge has been sort of warming me up the idea of overnight service being allowed, but I don't know how warm I'm getting, so that's where I am, and I need a lot more information. This has to have a fulsome, logical discussion with stats from our staff, opinions from engineering and planning and all of those things before I think any of us can really give something logical. Thank you.
Councillor O'Neill.
Thank you. I asked a series of questions. I didn't express any opinions, and I want to express an opinion and actually share some information as well. So my general opinion is that I am open to looking at changes similar to what Councillor Asmus and Councillor Morrison said most recently, to a certain degree Councillor Reid as well, both on the service of gas being self-serve in some instances, and on expanding the range of products allowed in these new style corner stores. I also wanted to talk about, so if a developer comes to us or a landowner comes to us and says he wants to change the zoning on his piece of property, that's never in our work plan. We don't know that that's going to be coming. It comes out of the blue, and then the planning department puts that in the queue of things to deal with. I'm not sure how this is any different. We've got a bylaw. We've got a guy who's affected by the bylaw who's coming, who wants to get a change. So I don't know exactly the process at that stage, but we can't plan for everything in advance, so we don't have work plans that deal with everything. So I would think that this is something that at some stage we should be able to deal with, not penalize the applicant, I'm not favor the applicant just because it came to council, but try to fit it into the regular work plan.
As I said earlier, we have an obligation to respond to formal applications, and they have submitted a formal application, and so the staff are going to be dealing with it. When you come into something that conflicts a long-standing council policy, sometimes staff don't do a lot of analysis on this. I do not know what Jim was intending, and he maybe should speak to this. But for normal rezonings, we have a general OCP. If it's generally in accordance with that OCP, of course we would work on it and spend a lot of time analyzing it. If it was totally against, for example, if someone applied for a 40-story apartment building in a single-family residence, they could apply for it, but we wouldn't spend a lot of time on that. This is a long-standing council policy not to allow this, so I would not expect us to spend a lot of time on this in the absence of council sentiment. That's just me speaking, but I don't get involved in these things. Jim does that, and I probably should have turned it right away to him. So, Jim, your comments.
Through the chair, you always want to be aligned with your boss. So
I encourage.
And as usual, we are. No, very, very true. I think I was trying to reference that before. It is an application we've received, and upon initial receipt, we thought it had a broader citywide policy implication, so that's not just specific to Chevron. We will process it. I think the councillor is quite correct. These things do cross our desk, and we don't put them off on the top shelf and forget about them. We do deal with them. But as the city manager noted, it's a long-standing policy, and it's come up before, and we recognize there's a history to this. It's fairly contentious. So, if anything, today's discussion from the council has been useful, I think, for us as well. And I think for council members also. So, no, we will take it away. As I mentioned, the person that had the file is no longer here, so we got to see how we're going to resource it. We may want to bring in some external assistance to do that, which we've done in the past. It'll also clearly involve other departments in the organization, engineering for one, economic development.
Scans, the whole works, right? Okay, I've got one further point that I want to make, and it's response to a couple of questions I asked earlier to Adrian here, and it was about whether or not the person inside the cash register has the ability to turn off the pumps. The more I thought about it, that person has to. And you were saying, no, it's the pumps are running and you can't prevent somebody from filling up their own. If I pull up to a self-service station and I don't have a credit card, I can't turn the pump on and start pumping. I've got to go inside and prepay, do I not?
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously there's control there. And by the way, in the interim, I did some research online, and yes, there is control. I have a first-hand account from a cashier in Ontario who runs one of these things and says that she, besides putting up with a lot of grief, she's able to turn off the pump if you allow your 4-year-old to pump your gas, or if you're talking to your cell phone while you're pumping your gas, or if your vehicle's running, or if you try to jam the gas cap into the handle to keep it running. She's got complete control. So you guys do have complete control. Your people who run the stations have complete control. So what I want to say to you is that if you're asking for us to change a law that you think is unfair, I want to see complete 100% abiding by the law we have in place now, and see what that happens. See what happens there. Because obviously, you believe in the value of the law, because you're here asking for us to change the law. I want to see that you're committed to believing in the value of that law that it stands right now, okay? And I'd like to see everybody else, and you named the other station that's the worst offender, actually. The guy's always on coffee break. There's one guy behind the cash register, and the other guy's on coffee break for 10 pumps. Let's see the law that as it stands right now being followed. And I see good evidence of that.
I think individuals operating at these stations, typically on minimum wage, are doing the best they can to follow the law. but they're maybe not always at the system that will allow them to. Maybe they're doing something else in the store, stacking shelves. There's always going to be gaps.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
One person on.
All right, thank you.
That concludes questions for you. Thank you very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Council. Controversial issue. Thank you.
Yeah.
Madam Chair, item 3 is our second delegation. I would like to invite Mr. Raymond Nothstein, Vice President Development and Planning at Wesbild Holdings, to please come forward. Mr. Nothstein will be speaking to the 3000 Highland Drive planning process.
Welcome.
Thank you. We're here to apply for a 40-story self-serve gas station.
40 stories.
It's starting to you know, happy birthday, you might get it.
If the tank's high enough, you won't need the electric generator.
That's a long
It's
time.
in the report.
So,
Yeah.
Committee Chair, thank you very much for having us here this afternoon. Tonight you'll be asked to consider first reading on what we call our, Raymond Nothstein with Wesbild Holdings in Jen Derbyshire.
Westbound, yeah.
Just in case you've forgotten who we are. Tonight you'll be asked to take a look at our application and consider first reading. And so we're here today to give a bit of a background and answer any questions you've got in a bit more of an informal setting. Our application is very much following the intent of the original neighborhood plan, which stated that this area should be used for a neighborhood park, school, and townhouse. As we know, the school sites are being consolidated, and so this site we are proposing now will still have that neighborhood park and townhouse. And it's really been with much consultation with the community, and it's been with a lot of dialogue with staff that we've come up with our proposal, which we're quite excited about in completing this neighborhood. Before going into the presentation, I do want to acknowledge specifically working with staff and the cooperation we've had and the back and forth dialogue, the way we're trying to get to all of our solutions. That's been an important part of what we've been doing. What's the magic button? Thank you. As you can see from the aerial photo, that this neighborhood is largely completed except for the D9 parcel. And this really was our first neighborhood on Burke Mountain. This was the vision that council had and started all of the development up there. And we really wanted to bring to our pioneers, if you will, this amenity that they've been expecting for quite some time. The most exciting part about this application, of course, is the park. This park is not in the master plan for the next 10 years. We're proposing to have this park open with working with PRC in the spring of 2018. So really advancing the time of this. What we're proposing, what we've been working with the park staff on, and this, of course, will all be to the discretion of council as we move forward, is a Super 8 grass playing field, continuation of the community garden, which is very much enjoyed by, well, it's oversubscribed and enjoyed by the community. A sports court, playground, and some unprogrammed areas that you can throw a frisbee or have a picnic or whatever. And I'd also like to point out at this point in time, you'll notice that the park is in the north part of this site. When we first came to the public, the park was on the south, and it was from listening to the public at our first open house and a subsequent petition that we received that we moved the park to the north. And also the north site is the preferred location for Parks and Rec, primarily because of the road frontage access, eyes on the street, where down the south it would be tucked in a bit more. There's two components to the park. There's the active area, which we just talked about, just slightly less than 4.5 acres. And there's about 13 acres of area associated with Hyde Creek natural lands that would also be part of this application. This land would be dedicated to the city at no cost. And what it will do is bring in and sort of qualify a bunch of uses that are not really in city land yet, but are city uses. There's trails, there's a trailhead, there's a sediment pond that the city has control of, and so it's going to bring all of those uses into the city ownership. There's also the Hyde Creek Watershed Society. They have a fish rearing pond that we built in cooperation with them that would come into city ownership as well. And in total, between the active and the passive park, we are looking at over 17 acres of parkland as part of this application. That north-south debate again as to which should be in which. So the park is in the north, which means development needs to be in the south. One of the technical aspects of this site is getting your sanitary sewer out, and what this site will require is pumping up to Princeton Avenue, and the best way to do that is with a townhouse type housing rather than single family, which a pump system is not allowed by the city. More importantly, though, why townhouse? It's about housing fit and affordability. This neighborhood already has a complete mix of housing types, RS7s, 8s, 9s, estate lots, townhousing of different types. So it really fits into this larger neighborhood, having townhouse. And of course, affordability is a big issue these days. Townhouses are more affordable in today's market. And as we know, supply is very important. If we can get more supply in, we can get more affordability. So it really ties into all of those aspects. Traffic and parking, something that rarely comes up at council, but we thought we should take a bit of a look at. We heard from our neighbors very clearly, and we took that very seriously. We've hired Bunton Associates to give us a snapshot of what life is really like now. We all have our sense of how busy something is, but if you can have someone qualify it and quantify it, that's going to be helpful in moving forward with decisions. So this slide is really about the collector road system that has always been anticipated. The Highland and Princeton already are collector roads. They're built to those standards. When this development is finished, Collins Road will be widened, and it will complete the collector route. At full build-out, once we've completed this area, and as you can see, it really is the last large area. There's a couple of infill spots. But at full build-out, at peak capacities, these collector roads are going to be activated at about 25 to 30% of their design capacity. And then that'll be it. You're not getting a lot more traffic than that. As part of Bunt's study, they went out and did traffic counts as to what was happening right now, and then projected forward what would happen with this application. Most of the people who bought in this neighborhood anticipated an elementary school. In fact, that was probably the reason that many of them did buy. An elementary school is one of your biggest peak AM traffic generators. So there would have been or should have been that anticipation of some peak traffic on these collector roads. With the school gone, what we have found is that with a townhouse park combination, that traffic is less than the elementary school that was anticipated and is about equal to single-family homes with secondary suites. So for our neighbors who are concerned about traffic, we understand that more development will bring more traffic. However, those concerns, it's, if it was single family or a townhouse, would be very similar on the traffic side. Just as a secondary point, for those of you who've seen the no to 120 townhouse signs that have been on a couple of lawns in that area, we used 120 townhouses with Bunt, and that was based on the average capacity of a townhouse site like this of 19 units per acre. Took us up to 120 odd townhouses. With the conditions that council and staff have put onto this development of the two-car garage, we anticipate that yield is going to go down to about 90 to 100. So these numbers are based on a larger design capacity. The reality is the traffic numbers will likely be less than this because the yield from the homes will be less. Parking, again, we needed to really understand what's happening on the site. And you can see that there is capacity. This was a traffic count done on one Wednesday evening. And most notably on Collins, which is a half road and has that environmental channel between Collins and the townhouses, no one was using that. And there's a good reason. It doesn't feel safe. It's not where I'd want to leave my car overnight. So we've got approximately 25 stalls that are already on the site that aren't being used. When the park is built out, transportation has asked us to widen Collins even further and put in 90-degree parking. So where before we were anticipating standard parallel parking in a total of about 50 spots that could service this park, we're now up to 75. So the on-street parking for the park use is going to be covered, and there is capacity already in the surrounding streets for the people who are using on-street parking. And then lastly, once again, that two-car garage criteria will mean that most of the townhouse owners will have their own parking, and there will be less competition for that on-street parking.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going to have to ask you to start to wind up because we've gone considerably over the 5 minutes.
So our summary
Perfect, thank you.
is that in working with staff, we've been able to bring forward what I think is a great proposal. Wesbild for this park will be contributing 1.4 acres of land at no cost to the city towards this park. The city is going to purchase 3 acres. The city's been able to do that by PRC moving their budgets around and moving things forward. They've also been able to achieve that by Wesbild accepting a less than market value for the land. We'll be dedicating the 13 acres of the Hyde Creek. We've offered to split the cost of the park construction and the road frontages with the city 50-50, and Wesbild has offered to do the park construction at no cost to the city. We're open for questions.
So for only one question from Councillor Reid.
Well, I would think probably my questions, oh no, I'll ask it here because, so I want to talk about Secret Ridge, your favorite project.
Mm-hmm.
This, to me, this particular development here, it has its own unique cachet. It's on the corner. We have an opportunity here through design of houses and mix of houses to make it a really special area. And so I'm wondering, you say in here that you consider the adjacent residential form, and I get that, but I'm looking for something a little special, and I'm sort of wondering if you're going to contemplate a mix of larger townhomes and smaller ones as well as houses, or is your vision all small ones with houses?
Well, as you know, Wesbild is a land developer.
I know that.
Yeah,
but
so
still.
we will be selling the property to a townhouse builder. As part of the way we normally operate, we do create design guidelines that the builders need to acknowledge and follow. We have not anticipated getting into that type of description on the built form.
That's all I needed to know. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Thanks. We talked about the location of the park. The preference was up high so that there'd be eyes on the street. But can people actually see the park through the green space before Collins Road? There's trees and
well, you wouldn't be seeing it from the other side of Collins, but you will be seeing it from, like, you wouldn't be seeing it from the townhouses that are there existing, but you will see it by all of the eyes on the street because of the road frontage on this. If it's in the south, you have less of that road frontage.
so eyes on the street of people driving, walking, parking, not from the residents.
It's that, and once the residential area is built out, you can see that it shares a common property, and the guidelines that the city has started to pull together on this reference that there needs to be that overlook, that interface between the residents and the park along that common boundary.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, that's fine. If the park was down below and the townhouses were above, you would not have to pump the sanitary waste?
That's correct.
So obviously that's not a huge factor?
It's a technical issue. So the only part that it has to do with our application is if you're pumping, you need to do townhouse. You can't do it with single family. we would, if things were flipped, we would still be moving forward with an application that had townhouse because we believe it fits with the neighborhood and this desire for affordability.
I think Joseph wants to
I
answer.
agree with that. I think Joseph wants to.
Okay. GM of Engineering and Public Works wants to speak. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to mention to council that there may be a minor discrepancy between the developers and the engineering department's view on the sanitary sewer servicing. I understand that there are ongoing discussions between the two parties. I also understand that the city engineering department does not object to sanitary sewer pumping stations for single-family units if it's necessary. And our position has been that while we acknowledge that the common pump sewage system is acceptable, we would like to see it only as a temporary measure, because there are opportunities to ultimately provide a gravity system, and that's going to be a requirement what we at the engineering department will follow through.
Thanks for that clarification, Joseph. I think Ray does a great job in terms of pitching the project from the developer's perspective, but that actually was a good clarification. There's some other minor clarifications where Ray referred to city preferences or whatever that, he might have over-exaggerated just a wee little bit. I'm not sure it's necessary to get into it. It has to do with the park location, that kind of thing. But you've done a great job pitching your perspective. I just didn't want it to be taken as gospel whenever the developer refers to the city preference. I'd rather that come from city staff directly through the questioning of the staff report, either tonight or today.
Agreed. I had a question, I guess, for engineering about the perpendicular parking on Collins. I thought we were trying to avoid that kind of parking situation.
Providing perpendicular parking is nothing unusual, and in this particular instance our department has taken a look at it and we actually support it. The general traffic on the roadway itself is very, very low, and so we believe that with this solution twice as many parking stalls can be provided, which will be needed. And I really don't see any substantial issue with it. We would support it in this case. Primarily because the traffic level on that road is yes, that's correct. The road is going to be built to new standard. The width is adequate. The traffic volumes are very low. The stalls will be meeting our standards, so I'm not concerned.
Okay. I guess my last question is, I know you're not actually building the townhouses, but my worry is because there's going to be an amazing park, that there won't be much of a play area in the townhouse complex. And it's just, it's one thing for a family to go to a park, for a couple hours, but when a child comes home from school and the parent is trying to make dinner, they can't take them to the park necessarily, and it's great to have a sort of a common play area in the townhouse complex.
And through the zoning, a minimum amenity space is required.
Sometimes those amenity spaces are pretty.
But it will take cooperation between the builder and.
So I'm just hoping that it could be a great development, and I just hope that we try to incorporate more of those kinds of things. That's it.
Okay. Mayor Stewart?
And I put my hand up at the moment when the reference was being made to not being allowed to use sanitary pumps for single family, because we obviously do on a private basis. These are private pumps on private property. For use of one unit by unit. Going back to the engineering then, do we have situations where, well, I can't even think of a situation where a private pump would handle more than one unit of single family? unless it's a single-family bare land strata sort of situation.
I do know specifically that we have a handful number of single-family units in the city which are served by individual pump stations. And I believe there is at least one, maybe two I know of, private pump stations or pump stations that serve 1 to 2 private single-family homes. This is certainly not a preferred solution, but there are examples. We would obviously much prefer, along with the property owners, to have gravity sewer servicing for a number of reasons. Primarily, the pump stations are maintenance intensive. The public sewage pump stations consume a significant amount of energy, so gravity is better. And more importantly, if there is a failure due to neglected maintenance, then the consequences could be really devastating to the homeowners. So the preference is clearly to have a gravity system, whether it's on the private side or on the public side. But we at the Engineering Ed, we do not prohibit single-family pump stations if that's the only way to do it.
Okay, I'm just trying to gather, if the Orange was going to be a single-family neighborhood, it is impractical to pump all of them in any way that would be uninterruptible by, say, power failure or some other...
That is correct. It would not be practical.
But it is practical to do it if it's a strata, if it's a common property sort of solution for all of the units on a property.
Yeah,
okay.
It's more practical.
Okay, so that might have been a better way to put it, that we don't prohibit it, but it isn't something that can reasonably be done with single family, but it can be done.
Yeah, thank you. I don't mean to misrepresent staff.
Thank you.
Councillor Marsden?
Thank you. Just very quickly, if you could flip back to the parking slide. You speak about the 75 units. So along the face of Collins, around the park front itself, that would allow for, on build-out, that would be 75?
There'll be about 50 that confront the park, and then the existing 25 on the east side.
Okay, so on a Saturday or Sunday morning when we've got 4 teams, 2 coming off and 2 coming on, then we've got 30 or 40 cars in the area, parents dropping off, picking up kids. The stalls are there fronting the park.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Providing no basement suite people in them.
Any more questions? No. That's everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming in today.
They have 2 issues. Two issues.
You bet.
Oh, darn.
Moving on to other business. OB1 concerns summer construction noise and was raised by Councillor Cirillo.
I don't know.
Thank you. Just going to pop open my notes.
He's allowed to speak if you want.
Well, there were 2 issues, he said, and I only heard
I
one.
believe that
So I think I've spoken in the past, and so have other councillors, about the construction fatigue that's happening in the city. And I've received a number of contacts from residents over the last few weeks while their windows have been open for the summer about construction happening in their neighborhoods before 9 a.m. on the weekend. I understand that we have a lot of development going on in the city, but I'm wondering if there's something that we can do, even just for the summer month, for a Sunday, to give our residents a break. Last week, or the week before, I received a couple of contacts about tree cutting starting. Like the chainsaw is just going like from 7:30 in the morning on the weekend. And I'm not sure if that's covered in the bylaw for construction noise. So the notes that I made were, is there a way that we as a city can give our residents a break on a Sunday morning to ensure that there's no construction noise before 9? Perhaps it's ramped up enforcement or a change to the bylaw, I don't know. But my other thought was maybe are we putting letters with permits, including tree cutting permits, to let people that are doing construction know that really there is a restriction on construction noise on the weekends. So I don't know what the answer is. What I know is there's many folks that are really, really tired of all the construction, and if we could give them one morning a weekend for the summer, that would be incredible. Any thoughts or about enforcement or a letter, or does staff have any ideas?
I'll start. Sure. Yeah, thank you. Especially with the weather getting warmer. It's
windows are open.
Windows are open, exactly. Before I turn over to Jim, because he's got more of the specifics around the bylaw and what we're doing now, and actually I should note on that one too, that with the construction site liaison person we've brought online at council support, we're
Sorry, can I just ask you, do they begin a shift at 7 a.m. on a Saturday and Sunday?
No, they don't, but we work very closely with bylaw enforcement, where they have not 24/7, but longer hours of coverage than we do from the planning and development, the building side, but we do have that resource there. The specific question around the hours, we'd probably have to go back and look at the bylaw to make the changes there. Jim can speak to that in a moment. We do the question about providing information with the tree cutting permit. We'll have to follow up with our Parks, Rec, and Culture people.
So if someone comes for a tree cutting permit, they are told Saturday and Sunday, 9 a.m., no noise before?
We provide good neighbor guidelines with building permits, but in terms of the tree cutting permits, I believe that information is conveyed, but maybe Jim can comment on that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, through the chair. I don't know if we specifically put in our tree management bylaw permit anything specifically about the hours of operation for noise. I mean, the noise bylaw is very clear. No activities for profit or gain, or any activities that create noise and disturb the peace before 9 a.m. on Sundays. The question is, I think, policing it. I think that's probably the concern, is somebody catching someone with a chainsaw at 7 a.m. By the time we do get there, it might be too late. It might be 9 a.m. and they're permitted to continue, maybe. So I think what we could do is certainly look at, we issue all types of permits throughout the city, is putting more literature, more packages in with that about noise. And we can look at that certainly and adding it to our Good Neighbor brochure.
That would be incredible. I mean, unfortunately, most people don't read the bylaw, right?
That's right.
So that would be, I guess that would be great. I mean, it's just some relief is what I hear.
Terry.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Reid.
I think we need to, for the summer months, it would be interesting. Maybe we should, maybe you could talk it over with Pete, maybe bring on some bylaw enforcement for building and construction. We've only got a month left of summer, but it might be an idea to have them come on for a few weeks and see what they catch. And I would suggest fine, fine, fine. And if they don't like paying the fines, then shut the darn job down. Sometimes you just have to hit them with a hammer and, you're going to say, oh, I didn't know, I didn't read this, I didn't read that, I didn't read this. So if they don't read, they pay. And it's down to, after reading all the information from Janet Klopp and the group up on Burke Mountain, there's no reason those guys shouldn't know what they should and shouldn't be doing before 9 a.m. So just fine them. And after 2 fines, you shut the site down. And that's about the way it's going to have to work. So it's my opinion.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad Councillor Zero brought this up again. I brought up the change a few years ago in the bylaw to have things start at 9 a.m. I don't think it's just for the summertime. I think a lot of this noise, even in the wintertime, if you have a chainsaw or something going up, is quite annoying and waking up the people in the morning. So my thing is similar to, I think if we get complaints from neighbors, we should act on them. We should also encourage people, if they have, as we've had before, their cameras or something, to record the issue that's happening for us, and we can then use that as issuing sort of a ticket. But I do think we should have bylaws making a priority. They shouldn't be out there, if they get a call, they should be out there within a half an hour, I would hope, not 2 hours. But I do think we have to be very proactive on dealing with this. I've said for years that we want to reduce the social impacts of construction. We know construction's happening, but especially like on a Sunday and some days, people deserve a bit of a break from the noise to sleep, and I think that's what Councillor Zerl is talking about. So I think the rules are there. I think what we need to do is, I want to take Councillor Reid's suggestion, just re-emphasize it, that you fine and you fine. But I think the biggest method that I've found on all these sites throughout the city is to actually then go and, if they don't comply, just shut them down for a couple of days.
Exactly
That's the
right.
biggest fine you can do them, and that will get their attention and make them smarten up. And you know what? We have to be a lot harder when we deal with that, and a lot less lenient and harder on that. I think that would help a lot of us and the people in the community.
If I could, and I think it's important to remember that we're really looking at two audiences out there, right? There's the construction developers, people who do this for a living, and then there's the average public, and both make noise. And I think when dealing with the people who are in the business of construction, there's a higher level of standard. That is something that our liaison person and our inspectors and bylaw enforcement work with on a daily business. If you're doing business in Coquitlam, this is what's expected of you. And from time to time, you're going to have someone who's going to violate it. We know who. It's easy to track down, and we begin that dialogue with them. And this is where the construction liaison person who's starting to really get their teeth into this, because they're building rapport with these people. When it's a member of the public, a resident, it's usually just naivety. They didn't know that a bylaw existed at 7 a.m. starting up the chainsaw. It's usually, most of them are making mistakes, and we attend the site, we talk to them, we speak to them, and they a lot of them are, we didn't realize that there was even a regulation, or if they did, they're not likely to do it again, and that's where, one fine usually tends to do it. So we're always dealing with two audiences here. So,
well, I think I've dealt with people before companies that are, I had a cement truck from a company locally here that was at just after 6 a.m. in the morning delivering a load, and they should have known a lot better to be doing that. But I also think, and I think one thing we should look at, as mentioned in some of the emails that have come into us, is about noise passed in the evening. And I think we also look at the amount of noise that people deserve to have some quiet in the evening also. I think anything after 6 p.m. should be non-audible indoors rather than a lot of racket with young kids and different families trying to enjoy their evenings also. So I think it's an issue. I think that's one area we have to look at also, is the evening portion of it. If you want to do drywall painting or whatever inside, but if you're running chainsaws, saws, and everything, and backhoe machines late in the evening, I don't think that's necessary. And I think, once again, our message out to the people that are building our community, respect and work with your neighbors in the community. Thank you.
Mayor Stewart.
I find myself wondering, we've been adjusting the noise bylaw over the years, and we added pile driving on a Saturday, for example. That was a Saturday morning council retreat where we called a wave notice, called a council meeting, and banned pile driving on a Saturday, and then walked the new bylaw over to the pile drivers who were operating on that Saturday. And I think the fatigue we're feeling now, of course, is so many neighborhoods that have multiple homes under construction, and I have reported a whole bunch of them. I go out on a Sunday and I'll see somebody constructing, and part of the challenge I know that bylaw enforcement has is that the bylaw reads that you cannot, for profit or gain, work on a Sunday, and if it's an owner-builder, they quite often can argue their way out of it by suggesting that, well, it's not for profit or gain, I'm building my own house, and of course that goes on the market when it's finished. But so I'm looking to have, it's not an urgent thing, but I would like to see council entertain an amendment that includes any house construction or any house demolition, whether it's for profit or gain or not, owner builder or not. If it's building a house or constructing a house, it's prohibited on a Sunday. And actually as well include on the time frame of Sundays include the word chainsaw, because right now it's not in there. It can be captured in the somewhat less prescriptive language of the bylaw, but chainsaw isn't in there. Incidentally,
or nail guns.
Or nail guns. The bylaw does prohibit operating a motorcycle that makes noise. So it's the bylaw is really, it allows lots of flexibility for staff, but it also is less prescriptive than perhaps other bylaws. So there's always room for tweaking. And in this case, I think it's worth getting into it a little bit and seeing whether we can be more refined, particularly on Sunday construction. One of the big issues that we have certainly in our neighborhood, for example, is backup alarms for the deliveries that take place at 6 o'clock in the morning, because it's not defined as construction, it's defined as delivery. And if you're delivering an excavator, you quite often want to do it before 7 a.m. so that we're not tying up roads with excavators being moved, but also because the excavator transfer companies have several deliveries to make overnight. I'm not sure how to get around that one, but it is incredibly, these backup alarms are incredibly loud. At FCM, I saw a backup alarm technology that uses white noise instead of the beep, and it is perceived as being less disruptive to neighborhoods, but we're not going to be able to change the industry. I just want to make sure that our neighborhoods aren't invaded when a house comes down and a new house starts going up. The invasion takes a year to get through, and it can do a lot of harm to people's mental health and their end health. So.
Anyone else?
Speaking of some noises.
Yeah, what is that? I have a question. Do we use cameras that residents, personal cameras, catching their neighbors breaking these bylaws? Do we use those when we issue tickets or enforce these?
We did.
As evidence?
Yeah.
You mean, I haven't seen any live video. I've seen a lot of photographs coming in, either through bylaw enforcement or sent in by email.
You have the trees number back.
Okay.
Yeah, that one.
Interesting. Because I have a resident who keeps emailing me videos of his neighbor, and I don't know what to do with it. Now I know that we... Okay.
Madam Chair, let us just confirm with bylaw enforcement staff, and we'll get back to you on that point.
I'd appreciate that. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
You're done?
Yeah.
Okay.
OB2 concerns demolition waste reduction and was raised by Councillor Hogg.
Yes, so just it's a question that's come up, and I was at a seminar a couple of months ago, and the discussion was about deconstruction, demolition of homes. And I don't know if this is for planning or for engineering or for both. So to me, may want to hang here. And Joseph, I know that you've been involved, so you may want to help me with this one too. I know that Metro has set targets for removing clean wood from the waste stream, and that a number of municipalities have enacted bylaws on in order to reduce the amount of construction waste going into the landfill system. I think there's 6 cities now that have enacted bylaws to that effect. I had a chance to see what Richmond is doing. They're working towards a 70% diversion on deconstruction waste. And I'm just wondering if we in Coquitlam have looked at it, if we have any plans. I know that Metro's going to be reaching out to communities throughout the Lower Mainland just to sort of see what we're doing or could be doing in the way of helping to reduce demolition waste.
Through the chair, yes, I'm aware of this initiative, and there have been some recent emails that perhaps triggered this item, as well as Metro Vancouver's Zero Waste Committee dealt with this issue very recently. And interestingly enough, the documentation by Metro Vancouver included a letter dated December 2012, where the BC Minister of Environment of the time indicated that the province has plans to bring in regulations to expand the expanded producer's responsibility, the EPR program, to include, among several other things, construction waste. Now, we know that some municipalities acted on their own and moved forward with municipality-specific regulations. And Stephanie is here in the audience. I'd like to ask her to give a brief update to Council on our intent.
Hi, thank you. So a few years ago, Metro Vancouver developed a sample bylaw that they shared with municipalities regarding regulating construction and demolition waste. And as Councillor Hodge mentioned, there have been a few municipalities since that have developed their own bylaws, some more closely aligned with Metro sample bylaw, others not as much. There's 6 in total now in the region that do have a form of a bylaw in place. City of Coquitlam does not currently have such a bylaw in place. And other than really following what's happening amongst our municipal counterparts and at the regional level, we haven't made any moves towards enacting or suggesting a bylaw such as this for Coquitlam at this point. The regional diversion target is 70%, and that includes embedded within it a target of 80% for construction and demolition waste. But again, our municipality is not regulating that currently.
And I'm just wondering if this is something we will look at, given that with the amount of development that is taking place. I know we're not the biggest in terms of volume, in terms of redevelopment. Richmond was very high, I suspect partly because of the Canada line and other things, but we are going to see more and more redevelopment, particularly in the Coquitlam area. We're seeing some older homes coming down in the northeast, and I'm just wondering if, given that we are starting to see more demolition taking place, what we are currently doing and what we may do in the future.
Through the chair, we haven't rehearsed this, so let me put forward my opinion. Realistically, at this point and over the last year and a half or even 2 years, at least to say, and for the foreseeable near future, the solid waste division's priority is to make sure that we will have a place to put our garbage and recyclables. In other words, because of the uncertainty associated with the existing Coquitlam transfer station and the attached recycling facility, we are working on a recycling plan for the city that we hope to present to council during the fall, and with council's direction we then can make a decision which way to proceed. The construction and demolition site related issues are at this point on the back burner. But if council wishes, in the fall when we come forward, we can open up this discussion and set some directions. As Stephanie mentioned, we at the city are very proud of our diversion rate. There is no question that dealing with construction waste certainly would be a good thing to do. But if you look at history, if you look at the sequence of regulations at Metro Vancouver for the entire Lower Mainland, there is a reason why they dealt with residential waste first, certain types of recyclables second, and even Metro Vancouver itself is lagging with dealing with construction waste. So it would be a good thing to do. In Coquitlam, we have resource issues.
Good, thank you. And I do note that when I look, because I sit on zero waste and I see our diversion rates, Coquitlam has one of the best, particularly in the areas of organics and stuff. So there's some things that we are leaders, and certainly I think we've shown that. And this is a chance to look at some other areas as well, but recognizing we have priorities. But I know that this will become a discussion throughout the region, and so hopefully that we're on it, and when the time comes, we can have that discussion. So thank you for the update.
Anyone else? Thank you.
Moving on to OB3. OB3 concerns the Oakdale neighborhood and was also raised by Councillor Hodge.
Hey, this follow up on a couple of emails that I've received and some concerns that I'm hearing from residents in the Oakdale area. And I used to live in that area, so I still know some of the former neighbors that live there. And I note that I guess there was a meeting last week, and from that meeting there's been some sort of resident concerns coming up. And I'm just wondering if at this point we could get sort of just some comment from staff on what the outcome was from that meeting, and not so much getting into the plan and what goes where, but just sort of where we go in terms of procedure. Residents are concerned that they may not have a chance to be heard, and just sort of where the process is going, where's the opportunity for future dialogue before we get to that, here's the piece that's coming to public hearing.
Madam Chair, if I could, just some opening remarks, then I'll hand off to Carl and Andrew. Yes, there was a meeting last week, and they'll get into the details because they were our representatives at that meeting. It relates to the Oakdale area with another thought in terms of the draft land use plan for that area. I think it's timely that this be raised today because we are seeing those emails come in. We are reviewing that along with other input we're receiving around this additional look at this area. We would be coming forward to council early in the fall with an analysis around that, what we're hearing, what are the specifics, what are the concerns, and what that might mean for the draft plan. So obviously we're not prepared for that today, but we are going to be working on that. So, but in the meantime, there's some angst and there's some questions out there. So we're, again, appreciate it's being raised today so we can speak to it, but also as people correspond with us, we'll get back to them as well. So I think it's useful. So with that, I'll hand it off to Carl and Andrew.
Thank you, Jim. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to this item. I think off the top, we did have that meeting, yes, with the Oakdale residents on July 21st, and it's part of the overall Coquitlam-Lougheed neighborhood plan update process. And by all means, that process is not finished. It's a proposal, and the intent is to go for consultation and refine a proposal based on the feedback that we get. So just a little bit of background. At the May 30th Council and Committee meeting, I remember that we presented the proposal, land use proposal for Oakdale, a preliminary land use direction, if you will, as a part of the larger package of the Coquitlam-Lougheed area. And it was based on a number of factors. We had public feedback from our consultation process, which involved open houses, online comment forms, paper surveys, and also discussions with the Oakdale Neighbourhood Association and residents in the area. And we combined that with analysis, planning principles, servicing principles, proximity of the neighborhood to SkyTrain, the lower third of Oakdale is within that 5-minute walk of the station, so we took that into account. And we presented that to council. And it was a departure from what we had shown in the Phase 2 open houses in fall 2015, and we definitely noted that and said we have to go out and consult further with the Oakdale community on this because it's new. It's a departure. So that's what we did. And in the previous meetings that we've had with the Oakdale Neighbourhood Association, open houses and discussions with residents, the initial sense was that no change, and as the process went along, we started hearing more feedback to say maybe consider change, and we took that forward. But we wanted to make sure that the proposal that came forward was based on sound technical rationale as well. It's not just on a change for the sake of change or on a wing and a prayer. And we followed that 4-step process that we talked about with council, collect the feedback, analyze, interpret, apply it to the areas with our planning, servicing principles, location, that sort of thing. But then also go out and check with the community, check with the neighborhood. And that's what we did. We immediately went out after the May 30th meeting, connected with Oakdale Neighbourhood Association, went and met with them, and they gave us some feedback. And the sense was that it was still, a little bit of a split there in terms of the change. And they said, well, why don't you guys come out for a neighborhood meeting on July 21st? So we did, and we presented that same presentation that we did to council, and we got feedback from that meeting. It's pretty clear that there was a high level of engagement at that meeting, and much higher than what we've seen previously in the process. And based on the feedback, it's clear that there's concern over the proposal as it stands now for most of the residents in attendance, and that there's more in favor of retaining the single-family character of Oakdale, especially in the interior of the neighborhood relative to the edges. So we'll have to reevaluate that proposal and come back with an alternative proposal and recommendation to council as a part of a future report back to council on the Coquitlam low heat plan in the fall. So we also have to review, there'll be other feedback that'll be coming in. We did have comment forms available, so we'll be taking a look at that as well. Moving forward, we're building a really good relationship with the Oakdale Neighbourhood Association. We're in close contact with the president, and we intend to go back and meet with them in the fall, check in with them. And when we come back to council with our reevaluated proposal, we will be right back there. And we're also going to see if we can get an open house at the Mediated Learning Academy as a part of the broader Coquitlam low heat open houses. And we're going to ask the Oakdale Neighbourhood Association to help us get the word out, because it was clear that perhaps we weren't able to get enough engagement in the initial parts of the plan. It is a large area, it's a large plan, so we're going to try and keep going with that increase that level of engagement, get good feedback.
Okay, thank you. So it's safe to say we've recognized that there are some concerns in the neighborhood. You heard that, I guess, from that particular meeting. So staff will be looking at some alternate proposals. You'll go back, I guess, to council with some ideas, and then go back to them. So what they saw Thursday or whenever the meeting was is something that is still under review, and that you're taking into account that feedback, and you're going to continue to work with them, because I think they see now as August things sort of tend to shut down a bit. I think that they're concerned that their voices aren't going to be heard during that process. And so my point to bringing this up today was just to sort of say, have staff sort of recognize that we need some work to do there, and the commitment that we're going to work with those residents to try to come up with a plan that may be, in their view, better than what they saw, or at least other options will be looked at.
Yeah, it's a proposal that will be refined based on feedback.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the update.
And there's a couple of questions. Councillor Zerlo.
Well, I just wanted to take the opportunity just to commend you, both Mr. Johansson, Mr. Merrill, and your whole team for making changes when you get feedback, and thank you for reaching out. I heard there was over 150 people. I heard 200, but
our estimate, I think, was 150. Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible. That's really good. And I just want to say thank you for listening. I mean, a lot of residents come forward and say we fear that it's pre-gone conclusions and we don't have any control. And here's proof that there actually is influence if you come out in significant numbers. So I want to say that. So thank you. Lastly, who is the new president of the Oakdale Community Association?
It's Dave Irving.
Thank you.
Councillor Robinson?
I had no questions.
Oh, I thought you...
I was just telling that she was...
Oh, okay. Anyone else? Mayor Stewart?
And it's always challenging when there's a gathering that... how do we know that was representative? Because I've heard so many people from Oakdale that said, why are we so low density? Why are we going townhouse? Why don't we go higher? Because we're within the 5-minute walk. We've got other areas like over near Coquitlam College where we've left it as single family within the 5-minute walk, and I wonder how we end up being assured we're representative. And secondly, since this flies in the face of planning principles, where do we go from here? So on the first question, is it representative?
Yes, through the chair to your worship. I think from the perspective of Andrew and myself, there were a lot of voices and questions that came up and said we're not supportive of townhouses coming this far into the neighborhood. There was one person that came up and did speak in favor of it. Again, we didn't have a tally in terms of who was for and against it. There was an impromptu vote held, and there were a number of, I would say that more hands went up than were there in terms of showing a majority in favor of no change. But we have to go through the comment forms that we've made available, and I would say that we're going to also re-engage. Like I said, we're going to re-engage with the Oakdale Neighbourhood Association and residents. There's a few residents that have provided some constructive feedback and have commented on, for example, the results that we got from our feedback showed a majority, about 57% in favor of option 3, which was densification along the edges, along Como Lake and Clark. And that's something where we've heard again that there might be some appetite for that, but it's more getting into the interior of the neighborhood with the townhouses where there's a lot more pushback. But I think that as we go forward in our discussions, and with the open houses that we'll be conducting, we'll be looking to get some more definitive feedback on for and against and that sort of thing.
Sorry if I could just add to that. Great answer from Carl. I guess that's the eternal challenge with these processes is, are we hearing from all the people at the same time, different groups at different times? And certainly what I heard from Carl and Andrew is, yeah, they're working very closely with the Neighborhood Association. In fact, let's use them. Let's capitalize on their network, their connections to get the word out so we don't have people in the next meeting saying, I never knew about this plan. So we try to get the knowledge, the information out there to a higher level. And certainly, Your Worship, we'll look at it. We'll try to report back as accurately and as we can, so Council has good, solid information. But also, too, as your planners, we'll give you our advice. And at the end of the day, the decision sort of comes and rests at the table of the elected officials. My last comment would be, and you've heard me say this before, not everything all the time or all at one time. It is a large area out there. I think that was one of the leaps in doing it as a single neighborhood plan. I think the recognition there may be some areas that are maybe more inclined to go at this point. We don't want to lose sight of those other areas, but that may be the next wave or a subsequent wave thereafter.
I'm still struggling, though, and this isn't the right venue because we don't have a full report before us, but I'm still struggling with that challenge that I don't know how this group was selected. The room was full of people. How did they select to be there? Quite often, we saw this with Austin Heights, for example, in 2011, where 2011, where we did 2.5 years of consultation, and pretty much everyone was on the same page, and council was unanimous with an area plan, a neighborhood plan, and subsequently we had hundreds of people that say they were against it, that they'd never heard of it and they were against it, and we were left with the choices of disregarding the input of the people that participated in the 2.5-year process in favor of and it turns out that it may well have been that the community was in favor of it, but there was a small percentage that showed up after the fact. Our challenge, of course, is that in some circumstances, one selects to go to a meeting because they're opposed to what's happening at the meeting, whereas if you participate in the process and the result was in keeping with what you were proposing, then you're not going to the meeting anymore. You've achieved what you wanted, and we end up with that potential for us to go back and forth and end up perhaps with a decision that isn't in particularly good planning. I've made up my mind on this. I'm just wanted to make sure that we have some way of knowing what the community wants rather than what the select group that showed up at that meeting wanted, because we know you're more likely to come to a public hearing if you're opposed to it than if you're in favor of it.
Anyone else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, that's the last formal item on the agenda.
Motion adjourned.
All in favor? Meeting adjourned until we reconvene and closed. Thank you.
I learned something new.
You did it.